Prime Minister covering a range of issues there, including electric vehicles, which has flared as a bit of a issue over the last couple of days. And the Prime Minister repeating some lines there he's made in the last couple of days, and also going to these protests that have been held this morning with animal rights activists blocking a major intersection in Melbourne for an hour or so at peak hour this morning. When we spoke to our reporter there in the last half hour or so, the police were clearing those people from that major intersection, but they've also been protests at a couple of abattoirs as well. Political reporter Jane Norman joins us now from Parliament House in Canberra. Jane, g'day. Yeah, so I'm guessing you might end up in the seat of Ford in the next month or so with this crazy trip for the politicians and the journalists to begin when the election is called in the next couple of days. And on that issue, what's the latest with the opinion polls that have come out in the last 24 hours?
Yeah, Joe, well, we all expected we would actually be on the campaign this week, but instead we're here covering Senate estimates, and even some of the senators who are in those hearings today have described it as a surprise week. But we have had two opinion polls published today. The first is Newspoll. We'll focus on that one to start with because that's one that most politicians follow closely. It's basically showing that Labor is still ahead, although the margin appears to be narrowing. If we look at the primary vote, the Coalition's primary vote since the last Newspoll taken about a month ago has increased 2 points to 38%. Labor's is down 2 points to 37%, although it should be noted those movements are within the poll's margin of error. On a two-party preferred basis, the Coalition's still trailing Labor according to Newspoll, 48 to 52%. Now, the other poll that's out today is IPSOS, published in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. That has a pretty similar two-party preferred. It's putting the Coalition at 47% to Labor's 53%. So these results are very much in line with the trend we've been seeing now for over a year, which is that Labor, according to the opinion polls, is on track for election victory and on track to form government in its own right. But as we do start to get towards polling day, the polls tend to tighten or narrow. So Labor's deputy leader, Tanya Plibersek, was asked about these results this morning, and she says she's not taking any notice of them. Here's what she had to say.
I'm not going to focus on the polls. What I'm going to focus on is convincing people one by one, if I have to, about the superiority of Labor's vision and also about the unity and discipline in our team. Bill and I have led a united and disciplined team for 6 years. In contrast, you've got Liberals and Nationals at each other's throats and no plan for the future.
And Jane, what's the latest on election date?
Well, it looks like May 11 is out unless the Prime Minister surprises all of us and calls the election today. It means that May 18 is firming as the favourite. A couple of reasons for that. Firstly, the Electoral Commission has said that that's the latest date the election can be held for it to properly finalise the Senate count. And secondly, the government has to give 33 days notice before the polls. So it's looking like Mr Morrison might call the election either Friday or Sunday this week. Now, it does look like the PM has sort of delayed it, and there are a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, and we heard about this in the press conference just then, Adani project has not yet been signed off, and if the government's in caretaker mode, then it can't sign off on that project. So there does look like that's possibly one reason. And secondly, obviously, the government can't spend any taxpayers' money once we get into caretaker mode. And this week, the government is spending big on basically selling its budget. So from the moment the government's in caretaker, it has to spend its own money effectively. So, yeah, Joe, we're expecting perhaps later this week the PM will fire the starter's gun on this election campaign.
And so, Jane, just once you do hit the road, once the campaign begins, I'm just interested to hear from you which seats you're tipping you probably will spend a fair bit of time in. We saw the Prime Minister then in the seat of Ford. One of the most marginal seats, actually a seat that's actually notionally Labor now, is Corangamite in the south of Victoria. Sarah Henderson's the member there at the moment. Are you expecting you could well be spending some time in that seat?
Absolutely, Joe. I mean, there are a whole bunch of safe seats that we will be spending very little time in, but there are many, many seats in play at this election. So if the Newspoll, for example, were replicated today, the Coalition's on track to lose 10 seats. And as it stands, they're governing in minorities. So they've actually got to win seats to form government. So the two key states will be Queensland and Victoria. In Victoria, seats like Corangamite, Dunkley, we'll see a lot of focus there. Likewise, in Queensland, Capricorn Capricornia, Ford. There are a whole bunch of seats really on a knife's edge, and with some boundary redistributions between the last election and this election, there are a few seats that are now notionally Labor, so they have a little bit of a leg up heading into this campaign.
OK, Jane Norman reporting there from Canberra.